Welcome, everyone. My name is Hiba. I work with Pencil and Paper. We're an enterprise UX studio based in Canada, and I'm hosting today's fireside chat with Miriam, design engineer and co-founder of Oddbird, a web agency based all over the world, and CEO and lead UX designer of Pencil and Paper, Ceara Crawshaw. Thank you guys for being here. So this is part of a UX fireside chat series in which we get to hear about UX design from the perspective of developers. That's not something you get to hear about or see too often. And there's a larger conversation to be had around how designers and developers collaborate together. And there's definitely some myth busting to do around the fact that developers aren't good at design or don't care about design. We're not here for that. So we're going to be diving into some pretty interesting topics today, specifically around this very interesting phrase, design engineer, which we call UX-minded developer, but this is something that Miriam's going to tell us a little bit more about. So Miriam, you're up first. Would you share a little bit about your background and how, as a developer, you kind of got more and more comfortable with UX design just as a practice?
Yeah, I would say for me, it actually went the other way around.
Great.
I was studying theater and also visual art. And I started doing poster designs for my theater and a few others around. And then more print design for people. I was doing a lot of print design. My first job was a print design job for an insurance company. But I also needed a website for my theater and for my band. So I learned how to make websites. And to me, making theater and making a website, it's all UX. It's all telling stories, bringing an audience through them. So it felt like very much the same concepts using different materials. So I got into this through UX and through design. And then over time, I just became obsessed with CSS in some weird ways. And I've been hyper-focused on CSS and HTML, and that's sort of taken over my job in a lot of ways. But all of it coming out of a UX background. And it's been fun then getting to hire people who I think are actually better designers than I am in a lot of ways, better at the visuals, and work with them and get to still be part of that process, part of that team, and also not the only one coming up with the creative side of the things.
Totally.
I think I found it stressful doing design for clients. They can tell you you're wrong too easily, you know? It's easier when you're writing code and they don't know if you're right or wrong.
Yeah, fair enough. But it's pretty interesting that you decided to co-found a web agency. But hey, we're here to bring good user experiences to the masses. But I'd like for you to tell us how you came across the phrase design engineer and how that's kind of how you've interpreted that within your agency and through your work.
Yeah, I'm not sure who coined the term. I associate it with Adekunle Oduye, who's been speaking about it quite a bit. And he's the first one that I saw using this term, design engineer, and I just love it. It feels like exactly what I do, what I'm interested in. I'm not just coding anything abstract, I'm coding designs. And that's what brought me here. Designs are what brought me here. So, yeah.
Totally. And for people that maybe would need a little bit more of like a contextualization of that phrase. So when you say that you're coding designs, how is that different than your typical kind of development process?
Yeah, so working as a design engineer and running an agency, I mean, for me, these terms have always flowed together and overlapped because I was running a small agency. I didn't need a title. Nobody needed a title necessarily, unless they were moving on to another company. And then, you know, they need it for getting a job. So it's all flowed together. And when Adekunle started talking about this design engineer thing, I was like, oh, that is what I do. And it's working really closely with the designers on our team. So they're sort of coming up with initial proposals, the creative direction, how are we going to solve this problem that a client has brought to us. And then I'm working with them to make sure it's something we can do and to figure out how it's going to move. The web isn't static. Everything changes. The content's going to change. The size is going to change. The color space is going to change. Everything changes. So then it's talking with the designer through those changes, through all the changes that could happen, and how do we want the design to move with those changes. And that's the thing that gets me really excited about engineering. And otherwise, I think I would still be a designer. But I like that, like taking a design and thinking about how it's going to adjust for different audiences in different contexts.
Totally.
So often our process starts with rougher mock-ups than most teams. We start really rough. We don't go too far in Photoshop or anything like that. And then we start to code it so that we can see it live. And then often one of us design engineers will sit with one of the designers and finish the design live in the browser.
That's super interesting. Ceara, have you, in your experience of working with a full range of developers, some that are more keen on the design front, some that are less, have you had an interaction like that?
Yeah, actually, yeah. When I was working on a really embedded, mature UX team, supporting like 2 feature teams on like a single product, we would do that kind of pairing all the time. And I also love learning from them about the concept of pairing, you know, like you got a buddy right here, you're working through the problems, you're like, oh, that's weird. Oh, it is weird. You know, you just have more, you're actually working together on the thing and you're seeing how it changes. And I think it's a really nice practice, and it kind of happens organically. Maybe we don't like call it anything, but on the best kind of output, the best designs in the kind of end product that I've been able to work on, that's how we've built them. It's not so much of, you know, throw it over the fence, good luck, bud. Haven't even met the dev team. Like that doesn't work super well. Well, it's painful on their end. It's painful on all of our ends, right? And so I love doing that practice. It's very cool. I could see it really, really being nice as well if we have the kind of things that are really hard to mock up as well. Like if you have weird data, like say data is kind of a good use case for that I've found, you know, like trying to do a data dashboard in Figma is great. You can kind of approximate it, but you cannot really get the entropy level embedded into the design that you need. You can kind of like try to exaggerate, try to make some rules. If this, you know, if data is like this, then you do that. But probably the best way to really prototype it and get it to work and get it to look good is doing that kind of pairing side by side, working through it together.
The phrase that we've used is UX-minded dev. Have you noticed things that they say or do that kind of opens up that invitation to you as a designer to kind of pair with them and work closely, more closely than you might work with the average developer on your team?
Yeah, so I think with the devs that we would call like UX-minded developer, they have a good intuitive sense of like when we should talk. So they have, you know, they've been smelling their code smells for years, but they can also smell the design smells. And so that's something I've seen with people that are really kind of tuned in to the UX side of things. They know, even if they're doing a form or something and it's like has validation in it or something like that, they're like, they have that prompt of like, I need to talk to you. So that sense of kind of like that trigger, we need to talk about this right now because I've seen it not go so well and gone down the rabbit hole a little too far. So UX minded devs definitely have that cue to start to collaborate sooner rather than later.
And often that's them noticing something not working in the UX, right? That's often they're looking at the screen and they're interested in what the user is experiencing, and they're paying attention to their own experience of it, and they care about it. And so they say, right, this, whatever I'm looking at here, probably needs fixing. Let me go talk to somebody.
Exactly.
Totally.
Yeah. So there's like a sense of kind of like quality there. And as much as you want to work through all of your edge cases beforehand, doesn't really always work. I'd say as well that like UX minded devs are really keeping their finger on the pulse around UX. So that general interest there too is there, and kind of like that desire to stay on top of not just all the coding frameworks, but also what's happening
Totally
on the front end.
It makes me actually think about how people see when they say UX UI, they tend to, immediately snap to visual design always. And it's just like, and it's that expectation that you need to be always building and producing really like beautiful looking screens and components all the time. But that we know that's not quite the case, right? Like being good at design, there's so many other skills and things that actually are very complementary to your existing skill set as a developer, and that you can hone and sharpen over time. And Miriam, I'm curious to know what are some of these maybe non-visual design skills that you think that you've used in your own career, but it's something that you like to see even within your team when you're working on a client's project?
Yeah, and what immediately comes to mind is it is the theater skills, right? It's like
Mhm.
timing and flow, and what am I feeling through this process? I'm being led somewhere, and how is that going? Or do I feel like I'm being left out, or I'm expected to know something that I don't know? And paying attention to those moments and making sure the user knows where they're going and feels confident with it. Or depending on what you're building, maybe it's a sense of surprise that you want, and you want that moment of surprise, unexpected. Often in UX, you don't. If you're dealing with data tables, surprise is not usually the goal. You want the data. But yeah, understanding like what is the story that we're telling, what are we leading people through, and how do we make sure that they feel comfortable and invited along through it, which involves timing and placement of things and kinesthetic response and repetition that's recognizable, things like that set up the experience.
So I have a spicy opinion for you, and I'd like you to just react to it. And Ceara, I'd like you to react to this too. But the way you talk about development, it's not how a lot of developers talk about it. And it sounds, and one might say, well, while you're spending all that time figuring out flow and placement and all these things, you're not spending time doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is coding, building. What would you say to that?
I'm a UX developer. So if I'm not developing the UX, what am I doing? But I mean, I think it does get to the way that a lot of teams are broken down into very clearly distinct roles. Like either you care about the UX or you just care about code.
Right.
And this idea that some of us can actually live in the middle of that and say, I care about how code affects UX. And actually, I think everybody to some extent should. That's what we're doing. That's what software is. So while I wouldn't ask designers to all go learn code, designers should care about what the code is doing. And while I wouldn't ask developers to all go learn everything about design, they should care about what the design is doing. It's all the product. So if we don't all care about that product, why are we here?
Hey,
Putting that in quotes.
I was gonna say mic drop. Like, I would agree with that. Ceara, do you have anything you would add to that, or how would you kind of respond to that prompt as a designer?
Yeah, I would say that prompt is definitely, I think, a typical mentality that we see. And it's definitely something I think that is a little bit, I don't know, maybe it's just kind of born from the like, devs are very precious, we need them to make things sort of mentality, and like, leave them alone. Let's give them pizza, then let them code, you know, like it's very like in certain ways, right? And so I think that is a mentality that we see, and yes, and we see a lot of products and websites that make you want to flip a table as well. So, you know, I think like Miriam hit it right on the head with this idea that like, what are we doing here there, bud? Like if we're not working in that same direction, we've seen, I mean, out of my UX buds that I have out there, the sad ones are the product designers, and it's like one little product designer and like 100 developers, and they're the advocate and they're the only one, and you don't get a great result out of that. We've seen this over and over again. It's like, it doesn't, one person advocating is not the way that we're going to get really human-centered experiences like out there into the world. So that's kind of how I would respond. That's what it makes me think about.
I think what both of you said, it adds a lot of, it's challenging like the typical structure of like a product team, or rather maybe what we're used to, because it's kind of been that way the last 20 years. And it kind of sounds like you guys are stirring things up. So I'm loving that.
The other thing that I was going to say is that I think sometimes development sprints don't line up with design sprints always. Development sprints, we've really focused on this process that breaks everything down and isolates everything. And that can be useful from a code perspective to do small pieces. And it doesn't always work for design. Sometimes you need to take a whole set of features and think about them as the whole to really get the kind of design you want. So I think it takes some careful project management to make sure that you're not forcing designers to move on this development style isolated sprint. And sometimes it works for designers to fit into that, to say, okay, yeah, I understand the one widget and I understand how it fits into the bigger picture, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah, I would say for sure it's a trap. It can be a trap if you get into a point where you're the designer and your job is to facilitate the sprint, like that sort of dynamic. I've seen a lot of people just basically quit their jobs because all they do is incremental change, and you don't get real improvements to the UX through it. So I definitely would agree with that.
I think that you guys are going into yet another kind of like layer of a product team, which is how we measure success, how we set up timelines. And measuring success, as you said, Miriam, is not about how fast did we do it on time, but it's did we do it well? Do we feel like we did it well? And I think that in my experience, so I am a PM by trade, so I've kind of been the bad cop. I've been the perpetrator of bad timelines. Mea culpa, I'm sorry. I apologize for all PMs out there. But everything that you both are saying, like I have 100% seen how a process can poison not only the well between designers and developers, but also can at the end of the day affect the end product, where, you know, the project manager can say, well, yeah, we got it done on time. We did do all the stories, but the way they were implemented and executed, it resulted in a suboptimal user experience. I think that it's an uncomfortable but fair thing to point out. And again, it's going into that that space about, we've kind of accepted that there's a certain way in which developers and designers are interacting with each other. And I think what's super refreshing to hear from the both of you is that it doesn't have to work that way. You can still be producing software really well, really quickly, with none of that other baggage. It is possible. And what both of you do on a day-to-day basis is a testament to that. Thought I'd just throw my 2 cents in there because the points are well received.
And it maybe gets back to that initial term, that UX-minded dev is sort of the can you step out of what's right in front of you and look at a big picture and ask questions about that overall.
I think that that's a really, really excellent place to bring our fireside chat to a conclusion on. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your perspectives. I think this was super informative. As a PM, it was really cool to step into both of your brains for a second. But before we sign off here, I'd like to give each of you the mic for 30 seconds and drop some truth bombs on the people. And if there's something that we could change as either designers, as developers, when it comes to delivering really great user experiences, what would you like to put out there? Number one, but then I'd like for you to also share kind of what's on your radar over the next couple of months, over the next year, in your own practice. What are some things that you're working on, that you're looking to maybe build or create? Each of you have the mic for 30 seconds. And Ceara, you get to go first.
All right. So I guess in closing, just food for thought for the dev crew as well as the design crew that might be watching. There's a lot of really creative and interesting ways that we can collaborate and integrate that into both of our processes. There's a lot of efficiencies to be made. So I think that getting a little bit curious about what those could be would be really useful for your workflow, for your work life. And plus, if you are a solo designer, you maybe don't want to just hang out by yourself. So use that as an excuse to meet a dev today. And then for developers, I think, you can do this UX thing is the other thing that I would say. We can all improve our interactions, make the UI a little bit nicer, find those stinkies and resolve them from even a UX perspective, like, actually, that doesn't work with the user, whatever the case is. And so on that vein, we've been creating the Design SOS course for developers. So we created this course. It is specifically geared to developers to be really pragmatic and to allow you to, diagnose and improve your UX across either websites or products or whatever you might be working on. So if you're curious about that, you can check out labs.pencilandpaper.io. Or just follow us on Twitter and hear our commentary about these various different topics at Pencil and Paper UX.
Thank you. And Miriam, tell us.
Yeah, I think, I maybe came to software from a different angle. I think to me, software is, we're building a society that we have to live in. People live with the things that we build, they interact with them. Sometimes we're building tools that people interact with daily. Sometimes tools websites that just really impact people's lives. And if we don't come to it with a deep care for the society we're building, the people that have to live in it, each other, that includes us, we have to also live in it. And that means, to me, it's all just people and how are people affected. I do not care about the technology. Like it doesn't matter. all that matters is how it impacts people. And so I just think that has to be the center. And sometimes that being the center is great. It means we're more friendly on our team. It means we're meeting interesting clients or users. And sometimes it's painful. It means we're telling clients, no, we won't do that to your users. That's not a okay thing to do to people. But to me, that has to be the heart of it. And it's the heart of a good designer, and it's the heart of a good engineer, and everything in between and everything they do together. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
That's some powerful stuff. I can +1 on all of that. Miriam, where can people find you online if they want to hear more of these amazing mic drop moments?
Oh, I don't promise any mic drop moments online, but oddbird.net is where you can find my company. And we do all sorts of web services for companies, either building from scratch or helping with refactors, accessibility, whatever. And then I'm Terrible Mia on Twitter, so you can find me there.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. And for everyone watching, see you at the next fireside chat. Bye.